journalism for 40 years. He taught economics at Delhi University for 11. And as a journalist, I think Sir has, I think, 12 prime ministers, 50 chief ministers. He's been the editor and group editorial director of the India Today Group, the editor of the Indian Express, editor-in-chief of the Financial Express as well, and is currently the editorial director of the New Indian Express. And of course, many of you know him from his famous talk shows like Seedhi Baat on Aaj Tak and Tikki Baat for TV18. So I'm very excited and delighted to have you as someone who really understands economics and has seen the insider and outsides of so many governments.
Thank you, Adi, for introducing me. I'm happy to talk to a young person who has experienced both global and domestic. I've learned something from you because I'm a learner even at the age of 74. Hopefully I'll be able to learn more about what is happening around.
Absolutely. And just to kick off, I think, given the fact that you've taught economics, right? And you've taught economics at Delhi University, which is one of India's premier, if not the premier economics university. And you've also seen what happens behind the scenes. So it's not just an academic look, you've seen what you say in class, and what happens really in the corridors of power. I would love to know, I started this entire notion of reforming India and seeing how we can do it. From an economics perspective, what's happening? What's going wrong? We seem to be talking about the same things again and again and again, decade after decade.
I think you're rightly put in a particular perspective. The question is, when you're talking about as a student of economics, and I must tell you that when I was a student at the Institute of Economics, and my teachers were many, like Amartya Sen was my teacher, and so was Dr. Manmohan Singh. So I have been a student of great economists in the world, and whatever I learned from them is not applicable anymore in this world now. Because what they taught is irrelevant economics. And because politics of economics is much more important. But whatever stages of economic growth we were taught at that time, I think India bypassed all those things. Because service sector in India, for example, now accounts for 57% of the GDP. As what we were taught by Professor Raj and Professor Amartya Sen and Jagdish Bhagwati and who else, that you go through the stages from the primary stage, from the manufacturing, then to services. Now we are stage 3 is come first and the stage 2 is gone almost. The manufacturing sector is almost 12-15% of the GDP and agriculture is stopped in there. So I don't know how we reach that stage. Therefore, what you are talking about becomes more important. Because when you go to a final stage of economic development, which America took almost 150 years to reach there, whether other European countries took almost centuries to reach there, we reached there in 20 years. So whether that was a sustainable economic reform introduced in 91, that is a question we have to discuss. Whether the fundamentals of European or economic or Western model or the Harvard where you went to, those models could be implemented blindly on India. You bypass other systems and go for a sector which is doing very well, which is hot money, I call it. Once they start doing less, the whole economy is sunk. So you're talking about your subject, which is very wide, reforming India. Reforming India from where?
It's
a huge subject.
Huge subject.
If you are reforming India, means where to start with? Because we should have reformed what I call the agriculture sector first. Because you are not unlocked the agriculture sector, where you still have 50% of the people dependent on 50% of the GDP. How is it possible that you're becoming 50% of the population have much below the national average of income? And there the people still has to create some kind of a demand for your services or for your manufacturing. Both the sectors are employing more people than what they're earning. So therefore, please.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you raised agriculture. One of the things that I keep talking about is, and this was shocking to me, right? The total number of arable land that is used for agriculture is pretty much equal from India and the US. And US, by the way, is not the most efficient agriculture producer in the world. There are a lot of other countries such as Germany, Denmark, etc., Belgium, which do a lot better. But can you imagine, we employ 600 million people in agriculture, producing 1/10 of the US output on the same amount of land, and where the entire US agriculture, everybody involved in the sector is 3.5 million. And one of the big questions which I ask, what happens in India when those 600 million people says, look, this is not sustainable. I'm going to stop being a farmer. And now, dear government, based on their social contract, say, now I want to get a job. And you mentioned this entire service sector boom, and I fully agree with you. In 20 years, we leaped so much that we forgot to build the fundamental building blocks of what creates a great economy. And the service sector, from an employment perspective, represents a very small percentage of the number of people who are actually employed compared to the greater out of 1.2 crore people. Hardly, from a direct employment, hardly impacts 5 to 10% of those people, despite, and as you said, 57% of the GDP in the economy. I think this is one of the great reasons why this conversation is so important, is that how do we reform India from a policy perspective? And reforms, and I'd love to get your perspective on this.
I think you're right. Let us go back to the services sector. Services sector, why I'm raising again, because I have been talking about it, which is not sustainable model for development of India. What has happened in COVID, all the service sectors are broken down because everything was closed. So therefore, when the service 57% of GDP, out of it 90% closed, hotels are closed, airlines are closed, everything is closed now. So you obviously have an impact on the people as well. Question is investment. Per $1 million of investment, how many people you employ in the service sector? Very little. And per $1 million investment in manufacturing, you employ 5 times more people. And per $1 million investment in agriculture, you probably might end up spending many more people. So instead of going for a labor intensive, because India is still, whatever you say, $2,500 income per year, which is nothing as compared to 40,000 somewhere else at 20,000. 2,500 if you are taking the mean average of capita income. Right. If you divide between the rural and the urban, then rural people must be having around $500 per year. So when you don't have enough people getting enough money in their hand to sustain the development of service sector, you want people to fly more and more. You want people to go to more. You give the numbers all the time. Which numbers are the same? You are talking about middle class. How many cars will I ultimately buy? I can buy one car, second car, third car, one house, second house. Ultimately, people who don't have a car or don't have a scooter or don't have a single bedroom house in their hand to sustain. And you reform what? Reform means you have to go back to the demand-led model rather than the supply model, which we have been following for the last 40 years. Create capacity, create capacity. Capacity for whom? For the same people. You want me to change my car every time. That's what happens. You go to the car wala, I get 20 messages every day. Your car is now 1 year old, you please change it. Then somebody says you're 2nd year old, you change it. No,
it's a fake demand generation versus...
They are pushing you all sorts of incentives. So when you're talking about reforms in India, I would say basically demand reform should be in the pattern of distribution of wealth, which has to be equitable distribution of wealth. Now, I would not say equal. Equal is much more socialistic and whatever you come.
And which is the main problem that stopped India reform in the first place was this old 18th century model using 18th century and even 14th century thinking, trying to build a 21st century economy.
Absolutely.
Can't happen. And I think that's why these reforms and whole-scale reforms are so important, G. Because, if you're going to build a 21st century economy, you need 21st century policies, you need 21st century laws, and you need 21st century support systems and infrastructure to move that $2,500 per capita to a Chinese level, which is around 10,000, right? That's a 4 or 5 time increase. Can you imagine, right? And I'll give you some numbers, which to me gives me a huge amount of heartache. The total central budget higher education spends is equal to the annual budget of one top 10 private university in the US. The total India budget, there are 10 to 15, 20 companies in the world who have higher revenues than the entire Indian budget combined. And so when you look at numbers, I think we need to acknowledge as a society that unless we fundamentally say that, look, a 6 to 7% growth, which is hardly generating, before COVID-19 was generating 3 million jobs when 15 million people are coming to the economy every year, that we have to fundamentally enact reforms and do it the way we did demonetization. Overnight, quick, immediate. And if we do these incrementals, little bit, and full credit to the government, they have been doing incremental reforms. I give them full credit for a lot of great work that's been done. But my worry is by the time they do the reforms required to get to a double-digit GDP growth, and these are cheap reforms, and they don't cost that much, and they increase tax revenues. we'll be in, वो Vision 2020 होता था, then will come Vision 2030, Vision 2050. I am worried in 10 years, now we're talking about Vision, 2100. So we need those reforms today.
Adi, the question reforms you're talking about, Prime Minister during the past 6 years have given a lot of new slogans to the country, which are all meant to empower everybody in every sector. He has given housing for all. He's saying Jal, Nal se Jal. He has said education. He has given Swasth Bharat. He has Digital India, Stand Up India, Made in India. All this put together is a great push if it implemented. Because it applies to everybody. He talks about technology, but at the same time, he talks about rural India as well. But the problem arises, as you early pointed out, that education budget of India, what you were speaking about, and 6% they have promised in the new policy, and 1968 policy education promised 6% also. 1986 policy also promised 6%. We are stuck at 2.5% at the moment. The question is, you have been to Harvard. I'm not saying that you should not have gone, but I'm saying we spend more money, double the amount we spend on Indian education than our children going abroad and spending abroad. $9 billion money goes out of India for students of rich parents and industries there, and maybe poor people as well. That 9 people is going because that is not encouraging the education reforms in India. Because all of us prefer to send my children to abroad so that there's no competition, there's no good school here. There we have got the IITs, we have got the IEMs, we are spending 5,000 crore rupees, almost $1 billion on every IIT. Still people don't want to come here. They do an IIT and go back to Harvard again or go back to somebody else.
But Prabhuji, on education, the new national education policy has been passed by the cabinet. And the reason why I say this, it's an absolutely brilliant policy. And this conversation is more about reforming industry and entrepreneurship and investment. But I have full faith in the new NEP. I think not enough people have actually read it. I think the media has covered a few nice points, board exams that has changed. Good president. But the NEP is the type of whole-scale reform. Although it's just a policy, I have to still wait until the bureaucracy gets through the knife and figures out what the laws that actually look at it. But I mean, that is the type of whole-scale reform that I'm talking about that needs to come into industry as well, to have a new deal for India, because the current DLG is not working. And it hasn't been working for quite some time. And I think COVID-19 has really pointed out a lot of holes in this old deal. And now is a great time to come out with a new deal for India and say, look, we had the courage to do demonetization, for better or worse. We had the courage to do the new national education policy. We have a courage for a new complete renovation of our ecosystem to encourage entrepreneurship and investment. And to me, that for me is the big thing the government can do, where, and there are a few policies which they can change, which can go from single digit to double digit growth within a couple of years. And that is what I'm really hoping for.
No, Aditya, I'll ask you specifically, because since you're young entrepreneurs, you're operating at various centers, multi-global company. Can you please tell us, as a journalist, I would like to do as an economist by training, what are the 3 basic reforms you're talking about? Reforming India. I'm talking about India. You're big. Right. So you give me 5 reforms in India which you would like to be considered, because you are in the CII, FICCI, all of you go into delegations, meet all the prime ministers comes every year, and you have been you are lobbying for policy changes, but at the end of it, individually you also do something different than what the CIA or FICCI decides, because everybody wants to have its own promotion. I know inside out. But question is, as a young industrialist, forget about CIA connection, because every chapter you're heading there. I would like to know what 5 basic reforms in India, you are a 35-year entrepreneur, you have a long life in front of you, you would like to see during the next 10 years or 20 years or 50 years?
Thank you for that question. First, I'd love to see them in the next 6 months. 10 years might be a little bit long, but I think there are certain reforms. And so before I talk about 5 specific, I just want to talk about 2 philosophical changes that have to happen, right? Because we can talk about reforms, but unless the fundamental philosophical basis of how you think about ecosystems and industry changes, any reform that you announce, and there've been committee and commission after commission, will just not get implemented the correct way. And I think the first big philosophical change that people have to do is that they have to see not just ease of doing business. I think ease of doing business is a wrong term. It should be ease of doing transactions. how fast can an
Sorry,
entrepreneur?
Adit, I will interrupt you. When you say ease of doing transaction, that gives a commercial tone to it.
It is a commercial tone, right? Because we are talking about commerce, we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about investments, right? And thank you for pointing that out, because a transaction can be anything. A transaction means, for example, getting a subsidy from the government. It's a transaction, right? And so I don't mean it just about profit-seeking transaction. Any interface, right, where two people are getting together to accomplish something together on a small level basis is a transaction, right? Whether you're buying a house or a car, or you're setting up a new factory, or you're getting a permit, these are all transactions, right? So how fast can you do a transaction? When people talk about growth, right, is essentially the combination of millions of transactions done at a certain speed. So how do you grow from 7% to 17%? The same number of transactions that you do in 1 year's time, you say you do it in 4 months' time, right? So the ease of doing transactions should be the focus. And I think that's a big philosophical change that people have to make. And the second big philosophical change that people have to make is to understand that India competes globally now, right? We have excellent skills, manpowers, local resources, fantastic, but we are not just competing against China anymore, right? We are competing against Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia in manufacturing, in startups and space. We're now competing against Costa Rica, Estonia, so many other countries. And now the US has put down the gauntlet and said, we want to compete against India as well for the same manufacturing, the same jobs, the same supply chains. And so anything that we do has to be globally benchmarked and globally competitive. It's very nice to say, oh, this is, we've reached 63 in ease of doing business rankings. But that means 63 countries ahead of us who are going to get a priority investment. We are going to get it after when our number comes. But then again, as you rightly said, G, what specifically? So firstly, I look at 5 key areas where you can do big reforms, which will move the needle. And I want to focus on things you can do tomorrow morning and get the benefit day after. Doing something that will take 5 years to reform or 10 years to reform is not going to allow the youth of India to meet their aspirations quickly. And I think nobody's in the mood now to wait for 2 more generations to see some great reform takes place, and certainly not under COVID-19. I think the first is land and development and real estate. I'll give you small examples here. Every state in India has its own system of measurements. Certain states, like Punjab and all, they use the Marla system. An urban Marla is different from a rural Marla, right?
Marla.
Right. And so getting a whole bunch of, if you're looking at an international person coming in, you're looking at domestic players trying to increase investment, create more housing, unlock land parcels, really building out India and physically building it out, right? You need to dramatically reform these parts. We have the metric system. There should be a national standards of all units of measurements, and we need to transition to that. Why? Because it makes transactions faster and easier. We still have stamp duties on land transfers. Now, the goal of the government should be, look, I am getting GST on cement, steel, all the inputs. I'm getting GST on the final sales of housing. I'm getting in GST and revenue when this is rented out, and I'm getting much higher GST than I'm getting on the 2%, 3% stamp duty. We should be, you keep selling and buying land until you are satisfied. We want the land to move from a holder to make it easier to come to the hands of somebody who will convert it and do value adds, right? So small reforms, eliminate all stamp duties. Say, look, develop land, transfer it between 20 people if you have to. Don't pay anything. And it will also stop black money. It will also stop reform like this. These are just 2 small reforms that can be done overnight, but will dramatically change
Aditya, I will stop you here because I have some doubt about it, because the land made a very important point, because measurement techniques are different in every state. That's the complication. And even the revenue records are not, even on digital, even now, you can't find your own land when you locate
Who owns the land? Who owns the land, right?
So that's there lies the problem.
I have to pay lakhs of rupees to a due diligence person to go find out who's, background, go find out where the records are. Why can't I have a digital ID with an OTP number that says, I claim I own this land, I give you the number, you give me, I get an OTP, great, verified, done.
Now you in an urban area, now Delhi has started giving you property number and digital number, but in urban area, rural area, you buy a land. For example, when I bought a land in 1989 or 84, when I went to see it again in 1989, I couldn't find it. And I had to take somebody with me who took some measurement and then found the land.
No GPS location, no.
But what I'm saying, what you are saying, no transaction of land. That land is the biggest source of black money even now. Because if you make it free without stamp duty, obviously your land is lying there, you will not give me free, you will take some money on it, or I will sell you, I'll take some money on you. But there has to be some, I don't know what is the system, the rest of the country, whether they take any transfer.
Why do people have black money in land? Because they don't want to pay the stamp duty. If there is no tax on land transfer, and you say, why would anybody want black money? They'll only want black money if they're trying to bribe somebody. But if they're not trying to bribe somebody, they say, give me a check. There is no tax.
All of you fought for GST. All of you fought for GST, one tax. What is happening? GST is not being stolen now. People don't pay GST even now.
Probably GST. I love that you raised GST. When GST was...
No, I'm raising this question because what corporates likes one tax system.
No.
Except what?
GST was supposed to be one nation, one rate, one number, one thing, just the way done everywhere else. Now, what do we have here? We have 1,024 filings every year for GST. We have so many loopholes in the system, 5 different slabs of rates and cesses. This only helps people who want to do bad practices, black money, corruption, because the option. You had one GST rate, one GST number, one GST system. Everybody has to pay it. Where is the room to hide? Where is the room to do anything? But because you made this complicated system, now you have all sorts of people who can underreport GST, overreport GST, do transfers, manipulate the GST numbers. You know, when the original GST system was there, you look at China. What does China do? And India is moving to that, by the way. Full credit to the government for pushing it. Every single invoice you issue has to be issued from the central Chinese GST system, right? You make an invoice, you issue it from it. There is one rate that gets issued. The next person has it. Clean, transparent system. India, every state government has its own GST guys. They have to do their own thing. They can give you a special dispensation. How do you get that special dispensation? You pay a little bit of money, etc. So a lot of these rules, and this is why we need the reforms. Good policy, clean digital reforms allow good actors to operate in the system. It does not allow bad actors. The more convoluted you make it, the more pages you add to the act, the more differential agencies you put in. This is when the bad actor said, aha, now I have the capability of finding a loophole, changing this, changing that. And see, everybody's very happy paying tax. A big problem that people think that industry doesn't want to pay tax. Industry wants to pay tax as long as the tax rate is globally competitive, they're willing to pay. The problem is, how do they pay tax? And what guarantee do they have once they have paid the tax? That they'll be left alone, that there'll be no tax terrorism. There's a lot of reforms that can be done.
Look at I'm an economist, not a student. I've done research on that. I'm talking about the kind of growth we had, GDP and whatnot. You're talking about reforms because tax are stolen. I'm looking at how people have become rich through a cleaner way also. But the cleaner way is not a clean way as well. For example, in India, last 2 years, 70% of the people got 1% of the people got 70% of GDP growth without paying the tax.
But why did that happen? Why were they allowed?
No, let me complete that sentence, because when 1% people go on increasing their wealth every year, then they don't pay the bank loans, but personally they are rich. So when you're talking about this kind of system is evolving in India, where rich people are getting the policy and reforms done, in which money is going to the pockets, their personal wealth they are becoming it. Now earlier the people used to say India is a rich country inhabited by poor when we were studying economics at that time. Now it is a country, rich country, it is a country of few rich people, many rich people, but it's still a poor country. You have more private planes, you have more private jets, you have houses worth billions of dollars in this country. But that is reflection of how your economic reforms or whatever reform are not being worked in such a way so that everybody gets a good education, good hospital. Now in the COVID, for example, everybody used to pay lakhs and lakhs of rupees to the hospital. Poor people can't afford it.
But here's the problem, Prabhuji. I love that you raised that thing. Why was a small number of people able to generate so much wealth? In your opinion, I disagree, on the expense of everybody else. And the reason why is because we had
you have to pay capital gains tax. I've been very clear, for 25 years, no capital gains tax were paid. People who own the company, they sold their share company. I don't grudge them. I don't grudge them because they made the money, they made the company, they deserve that.
Rochi, again, two aspects here. Are we a country that wants to get to a $4 trillion economy and make everybody rich? Or are we a country which is the same Einstein theory of madness, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different result, saying, look, there are a few rich people who have gotten rich, however, which they have, good, bad, indifferent. Let's take their money and distribute to the poor. And then everybody loses. So the first philosophical change here is that I want thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in India to own a private jet. I want all of them to have billion-dollar mansions. More and more of entrepreneurs we create, more and more wealth we create, more jobs we create. That's how people of India, and that's globally how people get wealthy. The second thing, G, it's about tax rates. I fully agree with you. I think everybody should pay tax and they should pay it well. My problem is that a lot of the reforms that I am saying are to fix a system that has allowed people to get away with all of this. The good actors, the clean actors, the people who have made money cleanly are penalized today. And the people who are bad actors, they're able to use the 200 loopholes, the 500 discretionary points in every single law that exists today to then figure out how to do all this black money and all this taxation nonsense. If we had
I'm making a different point. I'm saying in India, I'm making a different point. You are absolutely right. I am not against people who make money. If few richer people for $4 trillion economy, at the moment we have got $2.69 trillion economy. If those trillions are going into the hand of 100 people in India, there is going to be a problem little later. But I'm saying they should be level playing ground. If I'm selling my house, which I bought for 1 lakh rupees and send it for 10 lakh, on capital gains tax I pay on 9 lakh. But if Aditya Birla sells his share, which is bought at 10 rupees at 1,000 rupees, he doesn't pay any tax.
I love what you said about level playing ground. A level playing ground is a new startup. A person with only 5 lakh, 10 lakh rupees in profit is able to pay their GST without having any issues. I won't take names, big industrialists can hire 100 accountants, 200 lawyers, 500 regulatory people.
Correct.
The reason I'm asking for reforms is not to help them, because they can hire teams and teams of people. Every time the government comes out with a strange new law, they'll hire 5 more lawyers. They'll hire 20 more accountants. The level playing field I'm talking about is for small and medium enterprise, small and medium entrepreneurs, not to have to pay and put in 1,024 different GST forms every year and do 1 form a year. Then it's a level playing field.
Correct.
The level playing field in India, you put more regulations, who benefits? Large people benefits, because they are able to pay lawyers, they are paying accountants, and they're paying honestly corrupt people to manage the regulation. The level playing field is when you bring down the regulations, and then it becomes easy for anybody to enter these markets, anybody to get a license, anybody to start working. Trust me, all the large players, all the corrupt large players love regulation. They don't like reform. They love complicated acts. They love complicated systems because they know how to subvert them. They know how to pay someone to do it. They have professionals working that who can navigate. The level playing field, the person who gets trapped is the young entrepreneur who wants to do a clean business, but instead of spending 80% time building products, services, and meeting customers, he's spending 80% of time navigating all these special regulations that were made and only 20% time doing it. Why are there 30 startups in Estonia which are supposedly doing Indian business, but the founders went to Estonia because they realized by the time they formed the company, got the tax numbers, got their office, regulatory, this, that, etc., they had exhausted their capital and they had exhausted their mental balance.
Let us summarize that. Basically, you're talking about the Indian bureaucratic system, the regulatory system, is such that it doesn't allow any kind of a clean business or any kind of a fast track development in India. You're talking about that, basically.
So I think the IS and the bureaucracy is part of it, and they always have to be part of it. 10,000 IS officers, all the IFS, IRS, etc., run a 1.3 billion country. Honestly, there should be 1 lakh of them, and we need a lot more people to come into the bureaucracy because they are understaffed. But it's also the policies that they have to implement, and they are implementing. If you change those fundamental policies, their work burden goes down. The good officers, the good IS officers who have joined to do, and there are many of them, you also know them, I also know some of them, who want to do right by India, who want to create a brilliant country for everybody, they will love reforms. because it helps them be better people and it allows them to see the impact that they have on our nation's growth. It's only the
I will just remind you,
problem.
the Administrative Reforms Commission, because of bureaucracy based on the British system, and they left the IAS officer behind us, who are
18th century for a 21st century.
So basically, you have 10,000 IAS officers and they are being recruited. I asked one of the Prime Minister, why don't you stop IAS? He said, you want me to survive as a Prime Minister or not? IAS much more powerful than even the politicians are. But the question, Administrative Reforms Commission, first Administrative Reforms Commission was under Murad Desai. That was thrown in the dustbin. After that, again, Moili Commission happened. That has also been thrown in the dustbin because everybody who talks about reform, and you also as the CIA, FICI, I have never seen them talking about administrative reform because all of you are really cozy with the IAS officers. Have you ever spoken about administrative reform on any platform? Give me one example.
Of an administrative reform?
Yeah.
Very simple, G. And this is something.
I asked your CIA president also that question. He didn't have the answer.
Well, I'll answer. I mean, I can't answer for our president, but I will tell you something that the current government said during its election campaign 5-6 years ago, when they said, look, we will bring a dramatic number of professionals in to the IAS and systems, and we will expand the IAS to include specialists from all sorts of fields, and we'll create a revolving door, just the way it is in any good civil service around the world, where it's not about one entrance exam and then you get a batch number and a rank and that stays with you for the next 40-50 years of your life, but you have a much broader civil service, because India needs a broader civil service where you have a lot of new people coming in, but also IAS officers being able to take professional assignments both in India and abroad to learn experience, take 3-4 year sabbaticals, come back. And I think that is one big reform that everybody can agree on. It works for current IAS officers. It expands their horizons. It allows them to do more. And it also works for the system, because India right now is so understaffed in key policy positions, in key execution positions. You can't build a $4 trillion economy and manage 1.2, 1.3 billion people with a core cadre of only 10.
I don't know whether you want to look at the executive of the United States of America with so many trillions of economy, 19 trillion or 20 trillion economy. Look at the number of officers working in this government per million population. You will be astonished that America with 10 trillion, 20 trillion has less bureaucracy than we have got it. Maybe that's your point of view. The question I'm trying to say.
Compare us to our.
You're talking about IAS officers. Let me complete. I'm talking because you are talking IAS officers should go abroad and get training. More than 500, 600 officers go every year abroad for training. This year they have not been able to go.
I'm not saying training.
And they come back and you got the regulators, which is a system you borrowed from Western countries. Which regulator in India from telecom to anywhere has been able to introduce reform where the consumer is happy? All the regulators are just helping the company.
And that is why my plea is to the current government, who has proven that they can take bold, massive reforms. And like I said, many of these, quite frankly, fit in with what the IAS wants and needs to do. These are not at odds with the civil service.
I think
it's something most of them would also agree are much needed.
Let us have the last couple of questions. There's one question which I asked you specifically as a member of the president of the Delhi CIA chapter. Prime Minister gave a slogan, which was a very good slogan: minimum government, maximum governance. Do you think after 6 years that slogan has been implemented in some manner in this government?
Absolutely. I think the Prime Minister was very clear, and I think that has been implemented. And in the sense that, as I said, a huge amount of governance has happened, huge amount of control over the economy has happened, and very few people do it. So we have a very small number of people who are actually taking decisions, who are working, I must add, 24/7. I've never seen any of the level of hard work, at least in my short experience of India, they are putting in. So you have a very few people governing a very large country, and I think that's part of why I'm a little bit concerned, is that I think you need a lot more people. And I am generally a person who loves the thing minimum government, maximum governance. But somewhere I think the number of people who are in government, who are taking decisions, who are be able to do it, needs to be expanded. And this is what the Prime Minister said during his entire elections in the last 6 years, is to bring in a lot more professionals, bring in a lot more experts. and make them
But
part of a smaller government.
I'm getting little confused about it. You're saying there are a lot less people taking more decisions now. That is what you said. That the minimum government means there are
Smaller
fewer people taking,
cadre working on a big economy. Yes.
fewer people taking more decisions. But I'm talking about the size of bureaucracy is still bloating. The people, when I say government means the executive. It doesn't mean that in terms of whether
No,
prime
and I
minister
agree.
office is taking.
And by the way, 45% of India's entire budget goes between interest payments and salary payments to government officials. That's 45% of our budget goes there. So I fully agree with you. My thing is very different. I think we need to expand the number of people. I think
you're the 60, 70 ministers in this country, which was largest almost last 5 years. You got 760 level officers in this country, and there were only 425 years ago. What do you mean? I don't understand. That's what I'm doing. 1982, I wrote a story in India Today. 283 secretary level officers were there, Mrs. Gandhi's time. Now they've got 784. You've got 27 per commission. Got every IAS officer, there are 700 IAS officers who were retired and got in the Central Election Commission information system. You are saying, I don't understand. That's what I want you to clarify, that when you say less people are taking more decision, it means concentration of power, decision making is going there, but the nature of DNA of the government are not changed in terms of size.
Modi, I fully agree with you to some extent. I think when I see what I would love to see in the next 3 to 4 years, is I think India needs a 21st century governance system. And that does mean reforming how the existing governance works. And that starts from the bureaucracy, the IAS, it goes to PSUs, it all goes to that. And my thought on this entire minimum govern, maximum governance, I think it's a fantastic slogan, but you also have to see, how much output can it happen. If you have a petrol engine that is, that is running at 10% efficiency, no matter how much petrol you put in it, it's going to give you 10%. That same engine, if you're able to reform and bring to 70, 80% efficiency, a small amount of petrol will give you more output. And so my thing is reforming the engine. The size of the engine right now doesn't really matter. Is how effective the engine is, what are the policies it's doing, what are the reforms it's doing. And like I mentioned, like you had land and development in real estate, huge amount of stuff can be done in taxation, huge amount can be done in ports, manufacturing. We haven't even talked about Digital India Initiative, which was such a fantastic idea, but it has not taken off the way and especially in the COVID-19, we've seen how much of a digital India we actually are. And I think those lessons, once you bring those reforms in, and that you take that engine efficiency from 10% to 80%, then the size of the government, that is not an issue, because you're getting more output from the same size of the government.
Thank you, Aditya. I think I'm happy to note that a young entrepreneur like you has a faith in the system, and India has a great future. I think when people are optimists like you are the people who are going to drive the economy in the future. I think you have got a much more vast expanse of knowledge. You have dealt with it. I think your input will be good for the government of India. Hopefully through CIA and other system, it will reach them. Thank you for joining me and both of us in a nice discussion. I hope you also enjoyed it. We'll meet again soon and take up some other topics. Thank you.
Absolutely, Prabhuji, an absolute pleasure. And it's always wonderful to learn from someone who has been there and done that. And it's an absolute pleasure, sir. And you have been an instrumental icon in the history of how India and journalism has played out. And I'm so happy to see that you're still at it and will continue for many years to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Adit. Thank you.